So now I'm almost ready to put my puzzle together. And I'm almost ready to put it together. Minus one really important step. And you're going to see what that step is right now. So if I was to put these two pieces together and needed to make another modification, right? Maybe I wanted to pull them back apart again. That's when I run into a pretty major issue. And the issue I have here is that, SketchUp recognizes faces and lines. So here I have a line, right, or an edge that is now shared between multiple faces. So because this line is shared by this purple face and this kind of charcoal face here, SketchUp doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know how to separate these without bringing this face along with it. So to avoid that, to keep that from happening, what we need to do is we need to either make each piece a group or a component. I can show you how to do that right now. If I wanted to go ahead and select this entire piece and right click and chose to make it a group, you'll see that immediately, right, I just right clicked and I hit make group. And I immediately have a bounding box that shows up surrounding the entire shape. Whereas before, if I were to click on the shape, like with this piece here, any individual face or edge, right, that I select will highlight. But if I click on any part of a group, the entire group now highlights. So if I were to move this back in place, SketchUp is not going to attach, right, these two faces, right? I can move it in place, I can move it back out with no issues. Now, if I wanted to make multiple copies of this, in this case, right, for this exercise, I do, right? I'm going to have a copy of this puzzle piece for each step that we're going to create. Then I probably won't want to make it a group. I'm actually going to want to make it a component. And I want to show you the difference between the two. So if I wanted to ungroup this, I can right click and I can explode it. And just for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to copy it. So now I have two copies, right, of the same piece. Neither of them are grouped. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and make one of them a group, just like I did before. And I'm going to select, right click, and I'm going to make the second one a component. Okay, and I'm going to name it my purple block. That's this way I can organize all of the work that I do. And again, I get that same bounding box when I make it a component. And it behaves in a very similar way as my group did. Now, one of the key differences between these two seemingly identical pieces has to really do with when I want to make a modification, particularly if I wanted to make a modification of a copy of this piece. So now I have a group and a component and a copy of a group and a component. And here's where the difference can be seen. If I wanted to make a modification to one of these, I can double click and you'll see that bounding box gets bigger and it becomes dashed. Everything else gets kind of faded out. I can now make changes to this. Suppose I wanted to make it taller. I added an inch to it. I'll add that inch to both sides. So I've now made a change to this group, and I can, again, get out of that edit by clicking outside of the box. Now, out of these 4 instances of this purple block, only one of them has been modified. Whereas if I were to modify the component, I do it the same way. I double click, the bounding box changes. You know what, I'm going to change a couple of things. I'm going to change the color. I'm going to make it tan. I hope you notice that when I changed the color of this, the color of my copy also changed. If I change the length of the copy also changes. And that's one of the most significant differences between groups and components. So if I had a lot of iterations of this same piece and I needed to make a change to all of them, I only need to change one of them. Whereas if they were groups, they operate independently, and I would have to make that change to each and every one. Now, we say the rule of thumb is, only make something a component if you plan on making a copy of it, because when you have a model with a lot of components in it, it's really going to increase your file size, and it could potentially make your file run a lot slower. So if you notice, we named this component. We named it purple block. If I go to right click, I can see my entity info here. I can see that I have a defined component, and it's named purple block. If I wanted to find that component within my file, maybe I deleted that component, and I wanted to bring it back, I can bring up, right, under my default trays, I can bring up my components tray, and I can see, right, all of the components that are in my model. And right now, the only two components I have is my default person that comes with my SketchUp file and the purple block component. So if I wanted to, I can click on that and I can bring it back in. So the file has stored my component. So if we have a lot of components, then your file is storing a lot of geometry, right? So groups aren't stored, components are. So make something a component if you think you're going to make a copy of it. But if you're only going to make the one and you want to keep your file nice and light, then you might be able to just make it a group. So for our puzzle piece here, we are going to make copies, and it's entirely possible that we'll make modifications to some of these. So because of that, we're going to make sure that these are all components. So I'm going to explode this to make sure that all my entities are broken back apart, and I'm going to make it a component. And I'm going to name this one, for the purpose of our puzzle assignment, block 1. And as I make these components, you can see they start to show up in my file. Okay, so now I have my 7 pieces. They're all separate, and they are all components. Now I'm ready to start putting this puzzle piece together. I have all these pieces in the correct orientation, and now my puzzle should be able to come together pretty quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the steps that are outlined in the PDF to put this together. So I'm going to bring this kind of in place, and I want to explain another really fundamental principle with moving components and trying to bring them together. So whenever you're moving an entity or a group of entities in SketchUp, it's really important to use your inference points to make sure you're moving with accuracy. So I don't want to move this and try to, kind of eyeball this to see if I can get it to fit properly. Right? I think that kind of looks good. If we zoom in, we see we have some overlap, and we really haven't been accurate with the way that we've attached these. So you're always going to want to move from an inference point to an inference point. And for this puzzle cube, it's really always going to be from an endpoint to another endpoint. You want that inference point to really highlight and pop up, so you know that you've moved it from one corner to the other. You turn that bounding box off by just clicking off of it. You can really see we have a seamless line here. When we do that, we know that our puzzle cube is going to come together and it's going to be perfectly sized. If you notice, I'm bringing up the move tool pretty quickly because I'm using some shortcuts. I'm just typing in M, and it brings up the move tool for me. You'll also notice that we have a rotate function that's built into the move tool, which you can use for simple rotations. But I really like to use the full functionality of the rotate tool rather than the built-in rotate component that we have. Okay, so just like that, we're able to put our puzzle together.